Welcome to the Dale Sabor a Tu Salud podcast by Tadine. I am your host, Chef Carla Contreras. Join me as we steep in the world of Tadine with interviews from fellow creatives, foodies, and entrepreneurs from our comunidad. Kayla, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Can you share with us who you are and how you serve your community?
Yeah, my name is Kayla Castañeda. I'm the founder of Agua Bonita. And I think one of the biggest ways that I serve my community is by reinvesting in the local community with dollars and with resources. And for me, that really looks like supporting migrant farm workers because I live in Central California.
Before we get into learning about your business, I want to talk about tea. So, what's in your taza? What was your last studying tea?
I am partial to the pineapple tea blend. I think it's great for summer, especially when it's really hot, like how it's hot here. We hit 117 the other day. So,
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
great. Especially over some ice.
Yeah, that sounds delicious. It's one of my favorite blends, and it's also one of my favorite blends to mix into recipes. If anybody's interested in the recipes, you can find them on the Tadine Teas Instagram feed. We're going to get into wellness because studying has been around for actually it's almost 41 years at this point. It's rooted in wellness. Can you tell us about how wellness plays a role in your life and in your business?
Yeah, well, in our business, our product, it's aguas frescas, and traditional aguas frescas are made with over 80 grams of sugar per serving. So, wellness for us looks like cutting about 80% of that sugar from traditional preparations. And then wellness in my life honestly just looks like trying to balance work and home. And I don't know if there's ever like truly an even balance, but just trying to navigate that as best as possible.
I completely hear that as a mom of two and an entrepreneur. Can you tell us about your connection to Darin?
Yeah, I mean, I think we both have businesses that really try to focus on the community, and that's really the common thread here between us.
Can you tell us about how you started your business during a career shift during the pandemic? I'm so curious how you turned this into what it is today.
Yeah, so I used to work for a very large beverage corporation, and that's where I learned everything about the business of beverage. But I also realized that I could work there for 60 years and never see an idea come to life. So I decided to leave that job and start consulting for small food and beverage startups. And then that's where I learned that everyone that's an entrepreneur is just figuring it out as they go. And then the pandemic rolled into town. So the company that I was consulting for decided to close up shop. I had a lot of time on my hands, and then I decided, why not start my own venture? So that's exactly what I did. And I launched Agua Bonita in July of 2020.
And you came up with this idea, and I'm curious about the aguas frescas and the connection to imperfect fruit and how that idea came about and how it transpired and then went into action. Because I think that there's, this ideation phase and then actually doing it. Like, what did that look like?
Yeah. So for a little bit of like context, my family immigrated to California, well, to the States in general, a few generations ago. But they landed in Central California because that's where a lot of the migrant farm work was. So just picking fruit year round. And for lots of people that don't know this, about 30% of produce, like fruit, annually just goes straight to landfill just for not being like harvested or for being produced in mass or just like being not cute enough for the store shelf. So it all just goes right to waste. And my grandpa, who was a migrant farm worker for a large chunk of his life, would bring home fruit from the fields. He would like rescue this fruit and make us aguas frescas. My grandpa was also diabetic. So we had a different relationship to sugar in our house than some other households, although Latinos are disproportionately unfortunately affected by diabetes. So this was just like a way of life growing up, was like never letting anything go to waste, rescuing produce and fruit, and then making agua fresca. So that idea was the easiest part of the entire journey. I think it was just like getting it to launch and like commercialize that was the difficult part.
Yeah, it's taking, because I've worked with some companies, it's taking, that home recipe and translating it for mass production.
Yeah, for sure. It's so tricky. Even after a few years, any little change can really throw everything off.
Can we talk about funding? Because I have a statistic that women led startups receive less than 3% of VC investments. And I feel like we could have probably an hour long podcast about this conversation. But can you tell us about what it was like to receive and ask for funding?
Yeah, we received some funding a few years ago now, and it made me the first Latina in our industry that had raised over $1 million in venture capital, which is crazy because at the time it's like 2021. So there should have been a lot more people before me that got to that mark. So it was a really like great accomplishment and I felt very proud of it, but also very sad that this like was a statistic that even needed to be broken. And then as the company has evolved, we're in a really high capital industry. And so comparatively, like, yeah, okay, we raised 1 or 2 million, but there's other brands led by men who are raising like 7 to 10 million at the exact same stage as us. So we're still handicapped in that way. And there's still like that huge disparity. So it's always like a mixture of like being proud of the things that you have accomplished, but also there being still such a stark difference in, in the funding landscape. And even now, as we go out to fundraise again, you know, just because you've raised once doesn't mean like you will successfully raise follow-on capital. And I think it actually becomes that much more difficult because people want to know like, oh, okay, well then what did you do with the last money, which I feel like men don't get asked that nearly as critically as women do.
Yeah, that's questions, and questions about, and I've talked about this on the podcast with many other mothers of what it's like to be a mother, what it's like to be an entrepreneur, and these are questions that men don't get asked.
No, yeah, I got so much criticism and so many questions around my pregnancies while I was building this business. And I know for certain my male peers who had like 6 kids did not get asked like the same questions that I was getting asked during my first pregnancy.
Yeah, I completely hear what you're saying, and I feel like the questions that might get asked or the questions that might be perceived. I've had other people as guests on podcasts that have hidden pregnancies in order to not be perceived that they were pursuing their family life. So
Mhm.
I'm curious about the funding process and how that, do you think that that has been impacted having a young family?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hate to admit that I hid my first pregnancy for sure because I just did not want to have those conversations influence like what the core matter at hand was. But then second pregnancy and like once you kind of get through it, it's like, okay, it is what it is. And like I'm in my early-ish 30s, this is the time that if I'm going to have babies, like this is the time to do it. So it just comes with the territory.
Yeah. And we talked about this before we got in the podcast, and I'm convinced, and I'm going to say it again, is that moms can do anything.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Can we talk about your features? So you've been featured on Forbes, you've been featured on Inc., you've been featured on news outlets. What is it like to be visible and out there and pitching your business?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. On one side, I love being able to represent my business, my community, my culture in a way that is so out front and center, because we really do need people championing those things. And so I am like always humbled to get the opportunity to do so. But then also, the more visible you become, the more you open yourself up for criticism and just for like poaching of business ideas and things like that, you know? So it's like when we started, aguas frescas as a ready to drink category was like almost non-existent, like so much so that like we own the trademark to aguas frescas, you know. And in the last few years, we've had all the big like beverage companies have in development or have come out with aguas frescas. So, you know, it's one of those things where like I would say that we have influenced that, but also like now we're competing with that. And that might be just like, you know, a side effect of the visibility.
And how do you approach people that are copying your ideas? How do you approach that space or that landscape?
You know, you have to kind of just focus on what you do best. There's always going to be people imitating things or coming out with their own versions of these kind of same types of things, but you just kind of have to focus on what you do best, you know? And it's just part of the industry. It comes with the territory. And I think if you are building as authentically as you can and like builds an authentic audience, then that's really going to be what carries you through that like some of these big corporations cannot do.
And it makes you you, like, especially when we bring it back to the imperfect fruit and the reason that you started this.
Mhm.
It's so personal.
Yeah, and you know, as you evolve too, so will your community, you know. And I think that's just like such a huge difference from these like corporate versions of things that get pushed out to us, because it's like we don't have a whole, you know, think tank trying to like put out something. It's just like we're doing this because this is the way that we grew up, this is our culture, and this is like what we want to present.
Amazing. Can you tell us about pitch coaching? Because I did a deep dive on your personal Instagram and I discovered that you help others with their pitching. And what does that entail? What does it look like? Can you explore that with us?
Yeah, so when I started the business, I didn't have like friends and family to go to like raise a friends and family round, but we still needed money to kind of get into this. And so I turned to pitch competitions to win capital to bootstrap the business. I've had the good fortune of winning every pitch competition I've ever competed in, and I've won a little over $500,000 in pitch competition winnings. So that's how I really got the business off the ground. So now I take everything that, you know, I did and everything that I've seen, especially having raised traditional venture capital and won all these pitch competitions, and help other entrepreneurs refine their pitch and really figure out like what it is that they need to be saying to present their business in a way to get free money, because you know maybe we can't always get that big investment, but we can enter a pitch competition.
And what does that look like for someone who's listening to this podcast, someone who's in this maybe ideation phase and or early stage in their business? What does funding actually mean for a company?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're so early on, funding really is just getting you to the like minimum viable product, right? Especially if you're in consumer goods. It's just like getting something that you can put into other people's hands and then getting feedback on it and iterating and things like that. And it can also just be like a propellant for your growth, you know, if you really already have something that lots of people are into, like maybe you already have the formula down, but you just need to make way more of it. Like that can go towards like inventory financing. And so it looks different depending on like your industry, but it's really just like, how do I get to the next step is how you should always be looking at funding. Like, how much money do I need to accomplish something that can get me to that next step?
And that next step can be investing in product, or that next step can be investing in, I don't know, branding, design, marketing. Does this funding get stipulated that it must be used in X, Y, and Z way?
It depends. Sometimes if it's a grant, yes, like if it's an eco grant or something like that, then it might be like you can only use this to purchase imperfect fruit or something like that, you know? But sometimes it's more open-ended, and there's a wide variety of like grants and pitch competitions. So it just really depends on like where you're sourcing and what their rules are.
I'm curious because I feel like this is something that I'm definitely working on in my own family, is money mindset. And I wonder what the money mindset is to pitching, to receiving money, to using it into the business. What does that look like for you and for your clients?
You know, I think like the money mindset for me and some other entrepreneurs that are in my circle is that one, like there's money out there to be had. Regardless of what people say, it might be difficult, yes, but there's money out there to be had. And by winning it, you're not taking it away from someone else. You know, like there is more money to be had. There's enough money out there. But also, like, once you get money, you don't act like you got money. Like, you know, you need to be very frugal with the money that you do have and still try to build as like frugally as possible because like $1 million goes very quickly. But I would say like the most successful entrepreneurs I know have that like dual mindset where they like know like yeah there's abundance out there, like I'm deserving of it, and just because another entrepreneur has won lots of things does not mean that like there's less resources for me. But once I do have that money, you know, I need to be as best a steward of my money as I possibly can be.
Incredible. Incredible. I love that there's abundance, but there's also the mindset that you are using that money in the most wise way possible. And it sounds like for you, you've used it for a number of things in your business in order to grow, in order to flourish, and in order to teach other people how to do this.
Yeah, and I mean we're still learning, we're still growing, we're still optimizing, but it's one of those things where like yes, maybe revenue last year and revenue this year are the same, but it took me a third of the amount of money this year than it did last year to make that same amount, right? So like when you look at it that way, it's like okay, that means that every dollar that I get goes 3 times as far as it did before because now I know like exactly what to do with that dollar. And I think that that's like a very important lesson to learn as an entrepreneur. And hopefully you can learn it, you know, earlier and sooner rather than later.
So it sounds like this journey is constantly learning and growth for you.
Absolutely. And it's like different seasons, you know, like right now, I have no shame in saying like I'm in a season of struggle, but I also know like it's a season, not a permanent state of being. And that like this just comes with like the ebbs and flows of entrepreneurship and business in general, right? And so I always look at like, okay, what can I learn from this circumstance? And then like, how can I pivot, right? Like Agua Bonita was started in a pivot. And so I know like there's always some sort of pivot to be had. You just have to find it.
So, can you tell us what is going to unfold? What new projects do you have in 2024 and beyond? Speaking of pivots,
Yeah, I mean, I think 2024 and beyond, our focuses will be a little bit different. I think you'll see us in some new places, maybe a little bit outside of traditional retail, looking for like the right partnerships that can really accelerate our brand. And then also some new flavors and like maybe discontinuing some of our other flavors too.
can you tell us how we can find you and support your business, Kayla?
Yeah, right now you can find us at places like Whole Foods nationwide, most Targets in California. Amazon is always a great place to go for us. And then just checking out our website, and you can drop in your zip code in our store locator and see, who's got us close by.
Gracias. Thank you so much for steeping in the world of Tadine. I am your host, Chef Carla Contreras. You can find Tadine at Tadine Teas on Instagram, and more information in the show notes. If you're on iTunes or Spotify, please leave us a review. Adios.